Is all of European philosophy really just a series of footnotes to Plato? You will certainly have heard the infamous quote from Alfred Whitehead. Well, but you probably have never heard that this betrays, on the part of Alfred Whitehead, an incapacity, and to be frank, to think philosophically. Let me explain why. In some sense, one must of course acknowledge that Plato does in a way found the European philosophical tradition, and he does so together with his student Aristotle, who, if you know anything about Western philosophy or European philosophy, in fact was highly critical of Plato and extends the project critically but also alters it. Anyways, it is therefore vitally important to have a decent understanding of Plato's philosophy. And one should also know that one should not conflate Plato with Platonism. We should not conflate Plato with the history of reception. This was, by the way, the mistake that Nietzsche made. Just to mention this perhaps by the by, we will discuss this further at my Plato course, which you can enroll in now. The link to enroll is in the description of this video. So in fact, Plato himself even points out that there is a, as he calls it, a gigantic battle for being. Gigantomachia perites ousias. You find this quote in the Sophist dialogue. And this gigantic battle takes place between what Plato doesn't yet name as such, but which we have come to call realism and idealism. So between these two positions. Readers of Martin Heidegger, by the way, will certainly be aware of that line of the Gigantomachia perites ousias from the first paragraph of Being and Time. And readers will also be aware that Heidegger did point out that his attempt at phenomenology is also an attempt to overcome that very battle, to get over it and leave behind realism and idealism, which, just to mention this in passing, of course, we must see this as quite a ironic situation that the so-called neorealism fad, which has all but collapsed inside academia and outside academia, was nothing new at all, and was merely a step back behind into the gigantic battle of being, and that the good name of Martin Heidegger and his approach to philosophy was abused by these figures should tell you what you need to know about academic philosophy at this point. Anyways, thus already Plato sees a gigantic battle between what comes first, the mind or the mind independent. Of course, this is putting it simply. Being and Time and the Analytic of Dasein is the first attempt, or not the first one, of course, but is an attempt at overcoming the divide which plays itself out again and again. Plato, in his own thought, suggests a mediation between the two rather than a primacy of one over the other. And this is crucial to keep in mind. So no matter where you are in your philosophical journey, substantial grounding in Plato is pivotal. And the best book to begin really is the Republic, is the Politeia. This is where you need to begin if you want to read Plato. To understand, for example, Kant or Hegel, or even his harshest critic Nietzsche, and a thinker like Martin Heidegger, you must have a sound understanding of Plato first to understand the rest of the trajectory of European philosophy. Still, to reduce European philosophy to mere footnotes to Plato appears rather a reductive statement, even though Whitehead here admittedly only, as he says himself, generalizes. But still, it's too reductive a statement, for this would imply that all else had followed after Plato are mere attempts at adding to Platonism or explaining further what Plato may have meant here or there in his writings. Whitehead's remark is furthermore rather äußerlich, as we might say in German. This remark remains on the surface level. It's superficial, we could say, and it betrays an incapacity, really, and this is the crux of the matter, to enter into the realm of thought itself. You see, Whitehead only looks at this from the outside. He looks at Plato or European thought purely as a body of some theory that perhaps can be added to in some way or other, rather than understanding what is really at stake when we philosophize. What is at stake when we philosophize, and genuinely, which is not discussing theories, when we genuinely philosophize, what is at stake is the unity of being and thought. This is what philosophy has as its task. This is the task of philosophy, to articulate the thinking of thinking and to articulate the unity of being and thought. You see, every time we genuinely begin to think, thinking also begins anew. To some degree, we would not even have to have read anything to attempt thinking. And every time we think philosophically, not about your shopping, but every time we attempt to think philosophically, we will arrive at the same, but differently each time also given our epoch. This is why we should not regurgitate Platonism. There's no need to do that. Plato is not of our time, but his thought can be a guidance to how we think. This is why, by the by, we welcome everyone to participate in our philosophy courses at Halcyon, regardless of academic background, etc. For philosophy is a genuine human need, and in engaging with thinking, what we attempt to do each time is to find a hold, a stance, to take something to hold on to. This is also why philosophy is deeply grounded in scolaire, which we can poorly translate as leisure, but more on this at my Plato course. So let me say it again more succinctly, perhaps. To think genuinely and deeply does not mean to regurgitate theories and to uphold, for example, the dogma of Platonism, as if nothing had happened for the past 2,500 years. Instead, to think genuinely means rather to be pulled into and to draw something out of the realm of thought in which the same is always at stake, changed, however, by the times in its appearance or articulation. That very same is what Plato calls the idea. The idea of the good is just that. And it is for Plato, and this is also something that we must remember again, in beauty, that we get erotically close to that which is truth. And this is also a hint at what Plato refers to as anamnesis. That what actually we experience when we begin to think is we begin to remember. So thank you very much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Plato, then I highly encourage you to enroll in my course on Plato's Politeia, the Republic, which I recorded in Delphi and Athens with a view of the Acropolis in October 2023. The link to enroll is in the description of this video. So I hope that you can join me. Thank you very much indeed.